Hello, everyone. For today's lecture about vampires around the world, I thought I would come to you for pretend from the Batu Caves just outside of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We'll be talking about the Malaysian version of the vampire today, and so I thought you'd want to get a snapshot into the beautiful and colorful world that is Malaysia. All right, guys. So as I said, today we're going to be talking about vampires from around the world so that you can see the diversity of the vampire as an archetype or character in mythologies, and so that we can appreciate the diverse characteristics that vampires have and get away from just our Western, very European American conception of the vampire for a little while. So first, let's review where the traditional Western conceptions of the vampire come from. When I described some of the mythology that led to the witch myths in early modern Europe, I talked about Lilin demons that are part of the Lilith myth. And this is, again, the bewitched woman from ancient Near East or ancient Judaism that was disobedient to Adam and the Lord, and therefore is cast out of Eden and becomes an evil demon that likes to fly around at night and eat children's souls because she is vengeful and pissed off. So this exists throughout the ancient Near East in various forms, and is often associated with drinking the blood and life force from children at night. Similarly, we talked about the Strix character from ancient Greece and Rome, which were owls that flew around at night and drank blood. Again, these were primarily female creatures, and so they're kind of the predecessors to vampires in the West, and they're kind of the predecessors to witch. But in both cases, these are flying beasts that move around at night and drain the life force from others. And so this contributes to the medieval European conception of the vampire, and that emerges out of the Dark Ages of Europe, especially the end of the Dark Ages, the 1400s and 1500s, right around the time that you have the stories of Vlad the Impaler and Elizabeth Bathory in Eastern Europe. So there are a lot of vampire frenzies, which are kind of like witch hunts, but more just like looking for scary death people in Eastern Europe around the same time as the witch hunts in Western Europe. And in Western Europe, they're basically described as undead versions of witches, right? And Catholic Church is more than happy to kind of prop up this myth. And that's because most of the vampires that people were hearing about in Eastern Europe were either Orthodox Christians or they were connected with the Ottoman Empire in certain ways. And so the Catholic Church was more than happy to demonize like disobedient Christians and heretics and people over in Eastern Europe that they didn't fully understand. After all, like 300 years earlier, they had the whole Crusades thing. And so Eastern Europe was just kind of seen as this dangerous, treacherous place. So the Catholic Church actually supports the development of the myth of the vampire in Western Europe. So those are our European conceptions. Let's leave Europe aside and look at some of the interesting international variants that are somewhat similar in that they focus on drawing or sucking out the life force, but very, very different from the Judeo-Christian conception of the vampire. So first, let's talk about Ashanti. The Ashanti people live in what is today Ghana and Togo, and they have a character known as the Sasabonsam. And the Sasabonsam are vampires. They are kind of monkey-like. They have long tails that have like a hook or a claw on them. And like monkeys, they are able to use their back legs and feet to hold on to trees. And they swing down and bite people. They have metallic iron teeth, and that allows them to grab onto people and pull them up into the tree and then suck out their life force and eventually drop the corpse down onto the ground. So the Caribbean also offers us a form of the vampire. This is the Sucuyant. And this is especially in French-speaking parts of the Caribbean, so Haiti, etc. And she's actually an ugly old woman during the day. She's a hag, but at night she physically peels off her skin and leaves it in a pile in her house and turns into this red-hot ball of energy with a woman's face that flies around and sucks the life out of others. And so at night, she is beautiful and sexual and just a big ball of energy. This exists also in voodoo and is kind of conceptualized as more of like a dark spirit than an actual woman itself. We also have the Mexican and Southern American version of the vampire, which is the chupacabra, which literally means goat sucker. And this is more of a cross between a metamorph and a vampire, or like a werewolf and a vampire. It takes a number of physical forms as a beast, but is often described as having intelligence and agency. In other words, it decides what it wants to do. And so in that sense, it's not just a wild animal. It actually has intentionality, and so kind of falls into the category of the vampire because it drains out life force and blood, etc., from animals. So the Jiangshi, I was talking about them in one of the previous lectures when I got to counting. The Jiangshi are the Chinese conception of the vampire, but in Chinese folklore, this is actually a cross between what we would consider a zombie and a vampire. So it is a corpse, and as I said, in most societies outside of the West, vampires have some element of being a dead corpse. So the Chinese vampire is a corpse that has been reanimated and sucks the qi out of its victims. So in Chinese folk religions, the concept of the life force is not like the soul, the way that we have it in Judeo-Christianity, but rather qi, or life force. And so a vampire in the Chinese belief is someone that actually drinks that qi and keeps it within themselves. Because this is a zombie, because this is a bloated corpse, they're actually bright white and covered with moss and fungus, and it is believed that they walk around like a zombie with their arms out, but that they actually shoot vines out of their hands and are able to entrap or ensnare people in those vines and then bring them to them and suck out their life force. How do you fight a Jiangshi? You throw rice at it. It is obsessed with counting. It will have to stop and count that. In many ways, the Jiangshi myth or legend is really about making sure that you take care of corpses for your ancestors and bury them with all of the proper treatment and rites. And if you don't, then these people are going to come back and haunt you as Jiangshi. So it really fits in with their mythology and their ethos and their religion and their beliefs about respecting ancestors and paying tribute to them. Now, India and Hinduism have their own form of the vampire, and this is the Brahma Purusha. And the Brahma Purusha is like the most horrifying, maybe, of all of the vampires. So he is a sort of wicked demigod. He's not entirely God, but he's kind of a god. And like Shiva, he has multiple arms, and he actually pulls his own intestines out of his body and wraps them around his head like a little headdress, and then carries around a human skull as like a beer stein, except it's blood. And that's like what he does. He just goes and hangs out with the other gods and kind of like harasses people, and if you do something wicked, may come and like seriously to fucks with you. And what he likes to do is like pull out your intestines and eat them too, and drink your blood and like pour your blood into his skull and then walk around and talk about how awesome it is. Like, it's a very dark figure in a religion that has a lot of like very colorful figures to begin with. This vampire god, like if you're already a religion that has a lot of really interesting and evocative gods, like it's got to be incredibly over the top. So just like snacking on your own intestines while like wearing them as a headdress is pretty horrifying to me. Now, the only thing that could be worse is the Penanggalang. And the Penanggalang is like the ultimate terror beast, right? Because it is a beautiful, beautiful woman from Malaysia. It is a beautiful woman. She uses dark magic in order to keep her beautiful looks. And the way that she fuels this dark magic is she pops off her head at night and flies around with all of her internal organs hanging beneath her, and she sucks the blood and life force out of innocent victims and uses their life force in order to fuel her black magic so that she can perpetually stay young and beautiful. And like, if that doesn't have some interesting parallels to the Elizabeth Bathory case over in Hungary, like, I don't know. That's very, very interesting. There's really no reason that those stories should be connected, but there are some interesting similarities about the idea of beautiful, powerful women drinking blood in order to maintain that beauty. And in order to do that, they have to go and be like these evil, terrible monster creatures. All right, guys, thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed this snapshot of various cultures' perspectives on the vampire mythology. Thanks for listening.